Ethan Walker tapped his rough fingers against the steering wheel, staring at the modest, two-story house he called home. The setting sun stretched shadows across the neatly cut lawn, a calm scene that did nothing to ease the storm brewing inside him. Taking a steadying breath, he turned off the engine of his well-worn pickup and grabbed the envelope lying on the passenger seat. 150 grand, he murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. This better be the last of it. The envelope, packed with paperwork that confirmed his final payment on his mother-in-law's debt, felt heavy as a rock in his hand. Ethan's jaw tightened, remembering the endless hours of overtime, the odd jobs, and all the sacrifices he'd made to free Linda from her financial mess, for family, for Sarah. He stepped out of the truck, the brisk Denver air brushing against his skin as his work boots crunched on the gravel of the driveway. With each step toward the house, he held on to the hope that this would mark a fresh start, no more debts, no more worries, just him and Sarah finally building the life they'd envisioned. Pausing at the front door, he adjusted his worn flannel shirt and ran a hand through his short, dark hair. A slight movement caught his attention, a quick shift of the living room curtain. Ethan's brow creased, something didn't feel right. The moment he walked through the door, he felt the tension like a wall he could almost touch. Sarah was standing in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, her warm brown eyes now cold and distant. Perched on the edge of the sofa was Linda, her sharp gaze zeroed in on the envelope in Ethan's hand, as if she'd been waiting for it. "You're late," Sarah said in a clipped tone. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Traffic was rough, but I've got the final payment." "It's done, Linda. You're free of debt." He held out the envelope, expecting maybe some gratitude or at least a sense of relief. Instead, Linda snatched it from his hand, her red nails stark against the crisp white paper as she flipped through the documents. "Well, it's about time," she scoffed, barely glancing up. "I was starting to think you'd never come through." Swallowing his irritation, Ethan turned to his wife. "Sarah, sweetheart, what's going on here? I thought we'd be celebrating tonight. This is a huge milestone for us." Sarah let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Celebrate? Oh, Ethan, you're so naive." Her words stung, like a slap across the face. Ethan stepped back, studying her face, trying to recognize the woman he married. But all he saw was someone unfamiliar, cold, unfeeling, a stranger where warmth and love used to be. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked quietly, his voice edged with hurt. With a heavy sigh, Sarah uncrossed her arms and reached for the sleek leather purse on the coffee table. "It means, Ethan, that while you've been busy playing the knight in shining armor, paying off Mom's debts, I've been making plans of my own." Ethan's heart raced, a sick feeling curling in his stomach. "What kind of plans?" Linda interjected with a sly smile, her overly tight face twisting into a smirk. "The kind that don't involve you," she chimed, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. Sarah shot her mother a look of annoyance before fixing her gaze back on Ethan. "I found someone else, Ethan. Someone who can give me the life I've always dreamed of, the life you tried to give, I'll give you that. But it's not enough." "It never has been," Sarah said. The room spun, and Ethan gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles turning white. "You're cheating on me?" he asked, voice barely steady. "Don't act so surprised," Sarah replied, rolling her eyes. "Did you really think I'd be satisfied with this?" She waved a dismissive hand around the modest living room, a sneer pulling at her lips. "This tiny house, the cheap vacations, barely scraping by." Ethan's shock quickly morphed into anger. "We built this life together, Sarah. Everything I've done has been for us, for the future we were supposed to share." "Well, my future is with Derek Lawson now," she snapped. "Derek's a corporate lawyer, Ethan. Do you even realize the kind of lifestyle he can offer?" The name landed like a punch to Ethan's gut. Derek Lawson. He'd heard rumors about the man's questionable ethics and cutthroat ways. "You're leaving me for that lowlife?" Ethan's eyes flashed with disbelief and anger. That lowlife has more ambition in one finger than you have in your whole body. He understands me, Ethan. He knows what I need, she shot back. And what about what I need? Ethan's voice rose, pain and betrayal flooding to the surface. I gave everything I had to this family. I just finished paying off your mother's enormous debt, for crying out loud. Linda cleared her throat, her tone smug. Yes, well, consider that your parting gift, dear, a token of appreciation for services rendered. Ethan turned on her, his eyes blazing. You knew about this? You let me pay off your debt while Sarah was planning to leave? Linda just shrugged, inspecting her nails. A mother always looks out for her daughter's best interests. And let's be honest, Ethan, you were never going to be enough for my Sarah. A thick silence fell over the room, their words hanging in the air like a suffocating cloud. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together all the little clues he'd missed, the late nights at work events, the new clothes, the sudden preference for fancy restaurants. He'd been so wrapped up in providing that he'd missed the crumbling foundations of their marriage. How long? He asked quietly, barely holding himself together. Sarah hesitated, a flash of something, maybe guilt, maybe regret, flickering across her face. 6 months, she admitted. The betrayal hit deep, but Ethan steeled himself, refusing to let them see him break. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and, with a chilling calm, said, "Then all of you need to leave." Sarah blinked, caught off guard by his composure. "What?" "You heard me," he replied, his voice like steel. "If you're choosing him, if that's really what you want, then go. Both of you. Now." Linda stood, her face twisted in offense. "Now, wait just a minute, Ethan. You can't just." "I can, and I am," he interrupted, his gaze sharp. "This is my house. My name's on the mortgage. You want to throw away our marriage for some rich lawyer? Fine. But not under my roof." Sarah's smug expression wavered, replaced by a hint of doubt. "Ethan, be reasonable. We need time to." "To what?" Ethan's bitter laugh echoed. "To grab whatever you want to take to your new life. To strip this place bare like you've stripped away every ounce of trust one had in you. No. You made your choice. Now live with it." He strode to the front door and yanked it open. "Get out." For a moment, neither woman moved. Then, slowly, Sarah reached for her bag. "Fine," she said, her tone clipped. "We'll go to Derek's. His parents have plenty of room." "Of course they do," Ethan muttered as Sarah and Linda gathered their belongings. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room as he stood by the door, arms crossed, watching his wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, prepare to walk out of his life. Just as she was about to step over the threshold, Sarah paused. "Ethan, Save it," he said coldly. "I don't want to hear whatever excuse you're about to spin. Just go." With a final, almost regretful look, Sarah walked out, Linda right behind her. The click of their heels faded down the driveway, and Ethan slammed the door shut, the sound reverberating through the now empty house. He stood there for a long moment, forehead resting against the cool wood, before letting out a roar of pain and rage. Turning sharply, his fist connected with the framed photo of their wedding day, shattering the glass onto the hardwood floor. Ethan barely felt the sting of the cuts on his knuckles as he lifted the photo from the wreckage. Sarah's smiling face stared up at him, frozen in time. "You think I'm weak?" Ethan growled, crushing the photo in his fist. "You think I'll just stand by and take this? You have no idea who you've messed with." Fueled by a fierce determination, he headed straight to his home office. He fired up his computer, rifling through every file and document related to Linda's debt and his marriage to Sarah. Years of managing complex construction projects had sharpened his mind, and he put that skill to work now, determined to find a way to make them pay for their betrayal. As he pored over financial records and legal agreements, an idea started to form. Hours slipped by, and night settled fully outside, but Ethan remained intensely focused, piecing together a plan for revenge. By the time dawn approached, a grim smile crept onto his face as he leaned back in his chair. "Got you," he muttered, eyes fixed on the screen. He had discovered a small clause, buried deep in the loan agreement he'd signed to cover Linda's debt, that could nullify the entire payment if Sarah breached their marital contract. A spark of triumph flared in his eyes, along with a simmering rage. They thought they could discard him so easily, but they had sorely underestimated him. As the first light of morning filtered through the blinds, Ethan made a solemn vow to himself. He wouldn't rest until justice was served. Sarah, Linda, and Derek Lawson would come to know the full weight of their actions. Let them think he was broken. Let them believe he was defeated. For now, he would play the part of the wronged, passive husband. But behind the scenes, he would be carefully plotting their downfall. With renewed purpose, Ethan started gathering evidence of Sarah's affair, phone records, credit card statements, social media posts, anything that could serve as proof of her violation of their marital contract. His experience in construction had instilled in him a meticulous attention to detail, and he applied that skill here with relentless focus. Days turned into weeks as Ethan put on the mask of a man struggling to cope with a failed marriage, all the while driven by a single-minded goal beneath the surface. Then came the day of a mutual friend's barbecue, the first time he would face Sarah since that night. She looked radiant, clinging to the arm of a tall, well-dressed man Ethan knew had to be Derek Lawson. Summoning every ounce of self-control, Ethan approached them, forcing a polite smile that barely reached his eyes. "Sarah," he greeted her, his tone neutral. "You're looking well." Sarah's face registered surprise, caught off guard by his presence. "Ethan, I didn't expect to see you here." "Clearly," he replied coolly. Turning to Derek, he extended a hand. "You must be the famous Derek Lawson. I've heard plenty about you." Derek returned the handshake, his smile smug. "Likewise, Ethan. I hope there are no hard feelings between us. These things, well, they happen, don't they?" It took every ounce of Ethan's self-restraint not to flatten the man on the spot. Instead, he shrugged, playing the part of the resigned ex-husband. "You're right. These things happen," he said. "I just want Sarah to be happy, that's all I've ever wanted." For a moment, he caught a flicker of something in Sarah's expression, surprise, maybe even guilt. Good. Let her think he was taking the high road, it would only make his revenge all the sweeter when it came. As he turned to leave, he paused, glancing back at her. "Oh, Sarah." She looked at him, a hint of confusion in her eyes. "Yes, Ethan." He nodded, his voice soft. "I'm sorry." Her brow furrowed. "Sorry? For what?" "For whatever I did to make you unhappy, for not being enough. I hope you find what you're looking for with Derek." And with that, he walked away, leaving Sarah standing there, speechless. As soon as he was out of their sight, Ethan's controlled mask shattered, his fists clenching at his sides. The encounter had been necessary to lull them into a false sense of security, but it reopened wounds that were still raw, the pain as fresh as it had been the night she left. That night, sitting alone in his empty house, Ethan threw himself even harder into his mission. He dug deeper into Derek Lawson's background, calling in every favor he was owed, reaching out to old contacts, determined to uncover whatever skeletons Derek had hidden. What he found made his blood run cold. Derek, it turned out, was no stranger to deceit. Protected by his parents' connections, he had pulled off a string of shady real estate deals and investment scams. With his construction background, Ethan could easily pick apart the web of lies Derek had spun around his business ventures. As each piece of the puzzle snapped into place, Ethan felt a dark satisfaction building inside him. Derek hadn't just stolen his wife, He'd also handed Ethan the means to dismantle his entire empire. But Ethan wasn't about to rush this. Like any well-planned construction project, his revenge would require time, precision, and patience. He would gather evidence, make his case airtight, and bring Derek's empire crashing down around him. And when the dust settled, Sarah and Linda would end up right back where they started, or maybe even worse. The thought made him smirk as he looked out the window at the Denver skyline glittering in the distance. "You wanted to play games," he muttered, catching his hard reflection in the glass. "Fine. Game on. And this time, I'm playing to win." The glow of his computer screen cast harsh shadows over his face as he hunched over his desk, combing through financial records. Months had passed since Sarah's betrayal, but his resolve hadn't faded. If anything, it had hardened into something unbreakable. A knock at the door snapped him out of his focus. He checked the clock, 10:30 p.m. Who would be visiting at this hour? Moving cautiously, he peered through the peephole, and his jaw clenched at the sight of the visitor. He yanked the door open, staring down Linda with a look of pure steel. "What do you want?" Linda flinched at his tone but quickly composed herself. Now, Ethan. Is that any way to greet family?" "Family?" Ethan scoffed. "You lost any right to call yourself that when you helped Sarah stab me in the back." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Linda replied, waving her hand dismissively. "May I come in? It's a bit chilly out here." Ethan remained rooted in the doorway, arms crossed. "Say whatever you came to say and leave." For a moment, Linda's confident facade slipped, and he caught a glimpse of genuine worry in her eyes. It's about the debt, Ethan. The one you paid off." "What about it?" "Well, you see," Linda stammered, "there's been a bit of a complication. The creditors are claiming the debt wasn't fully settled. They're threatening legal action." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "And that's somehow my problem?" "Oh, come now, Ethan," Linda wheedled, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "You've always been so generous. Can't you help us out just this once more?" Ethan stood silent for a moment, his face a blank mask. Then, slowly, a cold smile spread across his face. "You've got a lot of nerve, Linda. After destroying my marriage, you think you can ask me for more money?" Linda's eyes widened, and she started to protest. "But, Ethan, No," Ethan cut her off, his voice sharp and unforgiving. "You and Sarah made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences." "But what about family?" Linda asked, her voice weak and desperate. Ethan leaned in close, speaking just above a whisper. "My family betrayed me. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a family anymore." With that, he slammed the door in her face, ignoring her muffled pleas from the other side. Heading back to his office, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over him. Everything was falling into place. The next morning, Ethan found himself at his favorite diner, sipping a black coffee. He'd been frequenting the place more and more, drawn to the comfort of familiar faces and the absence of pitying glances. Just as he was drifting into his thoughts, a voice sounded behind him. Well, if it isn't the man of the hour." Ethan looked up to see Derek Lawson sliding into the booth across from him, an irritatingly smug grin plastered on his face. "Lawson," Ethan greeted icily. "What brings you here to ruin my morning?" Derek chuckled, waving over the waitress for a coffee. "Come on now, Ethan. I thought we could have a civil chat. Man to man." Ethan's tone remained flat. "About what, exactly?" Derek leaned back in his seat, casual as ever. "About Sarah, of course. And about how we can all move forward peacefully." Ethan's grip tightened around his mug. "Peacefully? You steal my wife, and now you want to play nice?" Derek's smirk didn't falter. "Steal is such a harsh word. Sarah made her decision, Ethan. I'm just here to make sure there's no unfinished business. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What exactly are you getting at? Derek leaned forward, lowering his voice. I'm saying it'd be best for everyone if you just let go. Move on. Stop poking around in matters that aren't your concern anymore. Ethan's jaw tightened. And if I choose not to? Derek's expression stayed relaxed, but there was a glint of warning in his eyes. Let's just say, things could get messy for everyone involved. They locked eyes, tension thick in the air between them. Finally, Ethan rose, his voice chillingly calm. Appreciate the talk, Lawson. But we're done here. As he walked out of the diner, Ethan could feel Derek's gaze drilling into his back. Good. Let Derek think he'd scared him off. All he'd done was confirm Ethan's suspicions. Once home, Ethan dove back into his research, more driven than ever. Derek's veiled threat had only fueled his determination. He was close to uncovering something significant, he could feel it. And as he pored over financial records and property deeds, a pattern started to reveal itself. Derek wasn't dabbling in a few shady deals, he was at the heart of a massive fraud scheme, using his parents' influence to keep his tracks covered. Just then, Ethan's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. An unknown number lit up the screen. Hello, he answered cautiously. Is this Ethan Walker? A woman's voice asked. Depends on who's asking. My name is Laura Monroe, she replied. I think we have a shared interest to discuss. Ethan's breath caught. A Monroe, could she be Derek's sister? I'm listening, he said carefully. Not over the phone, Laura insisted. Can you meet me? There's a coffee shop on 5th and Main. 1 hour. Ethan hesitated, considering the risks. This could be a trap, or it might be exactly the lead he'd been waiting for. I'll be there, he replied. An hour later, Ethan found himself in a corner booth at the busy coffee shop, scanning the room. A woman in her mid-30s approached, carrying herself with confidence though her eyes held a wary edge. Ethan Walker, she asked, sliding into the seat across from him. He nodded. Laura Monroe, I assume. A humorless smile touched her lips. Derek's estranged sister, at your service. Ethan's gaze stayed sharp. Why reach out to me? Laura leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I know what my brother's been doing, and I want to see him face the consequences. Ethan narrowed his eyes. And why exactly should I trust you? You probably shouldn't, Laura admitted without hesitation. But I have information you need. And you're driven enough to do something with it. For the next hour, Laura painted a damning picture of Derek's underhanded activities. As a financial analyst, she had access to intel that had evaded even Ethan's thorough investigation. He's using our parents, Laura said, her voice laced with disgust. They genuinely believe they're investing in solid ventures, but Derek's siphoning their money into his schemes. Ethan absorbed her words, his mind racing. And Sarah? Where does she fit into all this? Laura's expression darkened. Your ex-wife? She's as involved as he is. Derek's using her real estate connections to push through some of his more questionable deals. The confirmation struck Ethan like a punch. He had suspected Sarah's involvement, but hearing it laid out so bluntly brought a sting he hadn't anticipated. Why are you telling me all this? He asked, working to keep his tone steady. Laura met his gaze, a mix of determination and regret in her eyes. Because someone has to stop him. And you, Ethan Walker, have more reason than anyone to see my brother brought down. Leaving the coffee shop, Ethan's head spun with all he'd learned. But alongside the chaos, he felt a sharpened sense of purpose. He had the puzzle pieces now, he just needed to put them together. Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into his work, cross-checking Laura's information with his own findings. He painstakingly compiled evidence, documenting every shady transaction, every manipulated deal. It was during this time that an unexpected visitor showed up at his door. The doorbell rang on a quiet Saturday afternoon, and when he opened it, there stood Sarah, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Sarah," he greeted, his voice even. "What brings you here?" She fumbled with the strap of her purse, not meeting his eyes. I need to talk, Ethan. Can I come in?" Despite his reservations, he stepped aside, allowing her to enter. They stood awkwardly in the living room, their shared history hanging heavy between them. "Well?" Ethan prompted when she remained silent. She took a shaky breath. "I made a mistake, Ethan. Leaving you, it wasn't what I thought it would be." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And what did you think it would be, Sarah?" "I don't know," she said, throwing up her hands. "Exciting, glamorous. But Derek, he's not who I thought he was." "And who exactly did you think he was?" Ethan's tone was hard. "A savior come to whisk you away from your dull life with me?" Sarah flinched. "That's not fair, Ethan." "Fair?" he cut in, his control starting to slip. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you threw away our marriage for someone you barely knew? Or when you let me pay off your mother's debt while you planned to leave?" Tears pooled in Sarah's eyes. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I know I hurt you, but I'm here now, trying to make things right." For a moment, Ethan's mind drifted to the woman he had once loved, to the life they'd planned together. But that woman was gone, replaced by the stranger standing before him. "It's too late, Sarah," he said quietly. "Whatever we had, it's over. You made sure of that. Can't we try?" Sarah asked, reaching for his hand. "For old time's sake." Ethan pulled back, his face hardening. "Old times? Those days are dead, Sarah. You killed them. Now you have to live with that choice." Sarah's face crumpled. "Ethan, please. I think you should leave," he said firmly. "Whatever you came here looking for, you won't find it." As he shut the door behind her sobbing form, Ethan felt a surprising lightness settle over him. He had faced his past and come out stronger. Now he could turn his attention to the future, and to taking down the people who had betrayed him. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a week later. Laura called with news about a major deal Derek was orchestrating, one that would secure his fraudulent empire and devastate countless innocent investors. "It's set for next Friday," Laura informed him, her tone tense. "If we're going to make a move, it has to be before then." Ethan nodded, though she couldn't see it. "I'm ready. Let's end this." With Laura's insider insights and the mountain of evidence Ethan had compiled, they pieced together a plan. Ethan would confront Derek, Sarah, and everyone else involved, laying bare the extent of their crimes and giving them one single chance to come clean. As the day of reckoning neared, a surprising calm washed over Ethan. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about justice. It was about ensuring that those who thought themselves untouchable were held accountable. The night before, he stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie. The reflection staring back was no longer the broken man he'd once seen, consumed by betrayal. This man was stronger, sharper, and ready to face down the people who had wronged him. "Let's finish this," he murmured to himself. He picked up his phone and sent out the invitations he'd carefully crafted, to Sarah, Linda, Derek, and Derek's parents, Philip and Diane Monroe. Each invitation was worded as though it were merely about finalizing the divorce and debt settlements. But none of them knew they were walking into their own day of judgment. As the morning sun cast a golden light across Ethan's living room, he carefully arranged the chairs. Each seat was placed with purpose, ready to host the players in this twisted game of betrayal. Today, he would make his final move. A sharp knock at the door signaled the arrival of his first guests. Ethan took a steadying breath and opened the door to see Sarah and Linda, both wearing expressions of discomfort. "Come in," he said, keeping his voice even. "The others will be here soon." Sarah glanced around the room, her eyes flicking nervously. Ethan, what's going on? Your message was vague. All in due time, he replied, gesturing toward the seats. Please, make yourselves comfortable. They sat, and another knock came moments later, announcing Derek and his parents, Philip and Diane. Derek's usual swagger faded as he surveyed the setup. Well, isn't this cozy? Derek joked, though his voice held an edge. A little family gathering. Ethan met Derek's gaze with an unyielding stare. Something like that. Please, everyone, take a seat. Once they were all seated, an uneasy silence settled over the room. Ethan stood, calm and focused, though his eyes were sharp with purpose. I'm sure you're all curious as to why I've asked you here, he began, his voice steady and clear. Linda shifted uncomfortably. You mentioned something about finalizing the divorce and settling debts. Did I? Ethan allowed himself a humorless smile. I suppose that's part of it. We are here to settle some debts, just not the kind you're thinking of. Derek leaned forward, his expression turning hostile. What are you up to, Walker? Ethan lifted a thick folder from the table beside him. I'm not up to anything, Lawson. In fact, I'd say the games are over. He opened the folder, revealing stacks of documents. For months, I've been collecting evidence, financial records, property deeds, bank statements. You'd be surprised what turns up once you start looking. Sarah's face went pale. Ethan, what is all this? Fraud, Sarah, he replied, his tone unyielding. Systematic, large-scale fraud. And every one of you is implicated. Derek jumped to his feet, his face flushed with anger. This is absurd. You can't just. Sit down, Derek, Ethan commanded, his voice firm and unyielding. To his surprise, Derek obeyed, sinking back into his seat. Ethan turned his attention to Philip and Diane Monroe. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, did you know that your son has been using your good name and connections to pull off fraudulent real estate schemes? Philip's face turned beet red. Derek, what's he talking about? Before Derek could stammer out a response, Ethan pressed on. He's been manipulating property values, setting up shell companies, and funneling money through various shady channels. And he's using your investments to fund it all. Diane gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Derek, please tell me this isn't true. Derek's calm mask finally slipped. Mom, Dad, I can explain everything. Oh, I bet you can, Ethan cut in, just like I'm sure Sarah can explain her part in all of this. All eyes turned to Sarah, who looked pale and shaken. I didn't know, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Derek told me it was all on the level. Ethan let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Come on, Sarah. You're not that naive, or at least I thought you weren't. He pulled out another document. Here's a record of all the properties you flipped for Derek. Strange how every single one is linked to the same shell companies, isn't it? Linda stood abruptly, her expression a mix of indignation and disbelief. Now see here, Ethan, you can't just throw accusations around without evidence. Ethan silenced her with a glare. Oh, I have evidence, Linda. Plenty of it, enough to bury all of you. He turned back to Philip and Diane. Your son has been lying to you, exploiting your name and money to prop up his little empire built on sand. And when it all comes crashing down, which it will, you'll be the ones left holding the bag. Philip's face had gone from red to a sickly gray. Derek, is this true? Have you been stealing from us? Derek's mask of confidence had completely shattered. Dad, listen. I can fix this. I just need a little more time. Time? Ethan scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. Time for what, Derek? To dig yourself deeper into this mess. To drag more unsuspecting people into your schemes. Ethan addressed the entire room, his voice carrying a quiet authority. I've spent months collecting this evidence, every fraudulent transaction, every doctored contract, every dollar misappropriated. It's all here. He held up a small USB drive. And it's ready to be sent to the SEC, the FBI, and every major news outlet in the country. The room erupted into chaos. Derek lunged forward, desperate to grab the USB, but Ethan sidestepped him with ease. Sarah collapsed into sobs, while Linda hurled accusations in a frantic attempt to shift the blame. Philip and Diane sat in stunned silence, the weight of the revelations pressing down on them like a stone. Enough. Ethan's voice cut through the clamor, silencing everyone. Sit down, all of you. Reluctantly, they each complied, glancing nervously at one another. Ethan's gaze was hard, moving from face to face without flinching. Here's what's going to happen, he began, his tone low but intense. Derek, you're going to confess everything to your parents and the authorities. You'll pay restitution to every single person you've defrauded, including your own family. Derek's face twisted with defiance. And why the hell would I do that? Ethan's smile was cold and steady. Because if you don't, I'll release everything I have. Your career will be over, your reputation destroyed, and you'll be looking at a long stint in federal prison. He turned to Sarah and Linda. And as for you too, Sarah, you'll resign from your real estate firm and come clean about your role in Derek's schemes. Sarah's face went white with panic. But my career is the least of your worries, Ethan finished for her. Then he turned to Linda, holding up yet another document. And Linda, that debt I paid off. It's coming back to haunt you. Linda paled, gripping the arms of her chair. What do you mean? Ethan smirked, dropping the paper on the table in front of her. Remember that clause in the loan agreement? The one that nullifies the payment if Sarah violates our marital contract. Well, adultery counts as a violation. That $150,000 is back in your name, with interest. Linda slumped, her bravado vanishing. But I can't pay that. I don't have the money. Not my problem, Ethan said coldly. Maybe you should have thought of that before you helped destroy my marriage. Turning to the room at large, his voice took on a tone of finality. You all have a choice. Come clean, face the consequences, and do your best to make amends. Or I'll release everything and watch your worlds burn. Silence fell as the weight of his ultimatum sank in. Derek finally broke the tension, his voice barely audible. You're bluffing, he muttered, though his lack of conviction was clear. You wouldn't really. Ethan's gaze bored into him. Wouldn't I? You took everything from me, Derek, my wife, my trust, my future. You really thought I'd just let it slide? He leaned closer, his voice dangerously low. I'm not bluffing. This ends today, one way or another. The only question is how much collateral damage you're willing to risk. Philip Monroe's voice trembled as he spoke. Son, is any of this true? Have you really been stealing from us? Derek's shoulders sagged, the fight leaving him. Dad, I'm sorry. I never wanted it to go this far. I thought I could fix it, make it work somehow. Diane let out a choked sob. Oh, Derek, what have you done? Ethan watched as their world unraveled, feeling a grim satisfaction. He turned to Sarah, who was looking at him with a mixture of fear and what almost looked like admiration. Ethan, she murmured, her voice soft and tremulous. I'm so sorry. I never knew it would come to this. For a fleeting moment, Ethan recalled the woman he had once loved and the future they had once imagined. But that woman was gone, replaced by the stranger sitting before him. Save it, Sarah, he replied, his voice flat. Your apologies mean nothing to me now. Linda, who had remained uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke up. You can't do this, Ethan. We're family. Ethan let out a hollow laugh. family. You forfeited that title the day you helped Sarah betray me. You made your choices, Linda. Now, you get to live with them. He surveyed the room, his voice resolute. You have 24 hours. Derek, you'll turn yourself in to the authorities. Sarah, you'll resign from your firm and provide a full statement of your involvement. And Linda, you'll make arrangements to repay the debt. Derek's eyes sparked with one last flicker of rebellion. And if we don't? Ethan's smile was like ice. Then I press this button, he said, holding up his phone, and everything goes public. Your careers, your reputations, your freedom, it all goes up in smoke. With that, he walked to the front door and swung it open. You all know the way out. I suggest you use the next 24 hours wisely. One by one, they filed out, each lost in their own troubled thoughts. Derek lingered at the threshold, glancing back at Ethan. You know, Derek said, a trace of his old arrogance slipping back into his voice, for someone who claims to be the better man, you've turned out to be quite the vindictive bastard. Ethan met his gaze, unwavering. The difference, Derek, is that I'm not doing this for my own gain. I'm doing it because it's right. Actions have consequences, and it's time you all faced yours. With that, he shut the door, closing out Derek and the others. Ethan stood there in the quiet, feeling the weight of his actions settle around him. He walked to the window and watched as Derek, Sarah, and Linda drove away, each car disappearing down the road. A part of him wanted to feel triumphant at their distress, but instead, he felt only a calm resolve. Justice, he realized, didn't always feel gratifying. But it was necessary. As the last car turned the corner, he took a deep breath, sensing that the storm that had upended his life was finally passing. Turning back to his empty home, he felt both the ache of solitude and a new clarity, a sense of peace he hadn't known since the betrayal. The next morning, his phone buzzed with notifications, news alerts, texts, even a voicemail from his lawyer. He didn't need to read them to know what had happened. Derek had turned himself in, Sarah had resigned, and Linda was scrambling to secure a loan to repay her debt. It was over. As Ethan got ready for the day, he glanced at his reflection. The man looking back at him seemed older, tougher, yet somehow whole. He allowed himself a small, grim smile. It was time to reclaim his life. Later that morning, Ethan drove to his first job site in weeks, the familiar sounds of construction filling the air. He'd neglected his company during his pursuit of justice, but now he saw it as an opportunity to rebuild, not only his business but himself. His employees greeted him with smiles, handshakes, and pats on the back, their respect rekindling a sense of purpose within him. In the weeks that followed, Ethan immersed himself in his work, finding comfort in the rhythm of planning projects, visiting sites, and leading team meetings. With each passing day, the shadows of his past faded, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and pride in the new foundation he was building, both in his life and in his business. One Saturday morning, Ethan was savoring a cup of coffee at his favorite diner, watching people drift in and out, enjoying the simple pleasure of a peaceful moment. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mind if I join you?" He looked up to see Laura Monroe standing beside his table, her expression softer than when they'd first met. She offered a genuine, tentative smile. "Please," Ethan replied, gesturing to the seat across from him. Laura settled in, ordering a coffee, and for a moment, they sat in comfortable silence. Finally, Laura spoke. "I just wanted to thank you." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Thank me? I didn't exactly make things easy for your family." "No, you didn't," Laura admitted, her gaze steady. "But you did what was necessary. Derek, he was spiraling out of control, and my parents, they were blind to it. They needed a wake-up call, and you gave them one. So, thank you." Ethan nodded, absorbing her words. "And how are they? Your parents?" Laura sighed, her expression tinged with sadness. "They're processing. Seeing Derek face the consequences is hard for them. But maybe now they'll finally gain some clarity. Ethan nodded, understanding. It's never easy to face the truth about someone you love. No, it isn't, Laura replied, her gaze softening as she looked at him. And you? How are you holding up, Ethan? He took a moment, considering her question. It was one he hadn't asked himself in a while. I'm getting there. Trying to put the pieces back together. They sat in a companionable silence before Laura cleared her throat. Well, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Ethan offered a warm smile. Thanks, Laura. I might just take you up on that. In the months that followed, Ethan and Laura found themselves meeting more frequently, sharing coffee and conversation, and even laughing over some of the absurdities they'd encountered with Derek's schemes. Laura became a steady presence, a confidant who understood the shadows Ethan had faced, helping him heal as he rebuilt his life. One evening, as they strolled along a quiet path in Denver's city park, Laura slowed, then reached out and gently touched his arm. Ethan, you know, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. After everything you went through. I don't think I could have done it. Ethan turned to her, a hint of softness in his gaze that he hadn't felt in a long time. I'm not sure it was strength, Laura. Maybe it was just the need to survive, to find a way through to the other side. Whatever it was, I'm grateful you did, she replied, her voice filled with warmth. They walked in comfortable silence, the city lights casting a soft glow around them. In that quiet moment, Ethan felt something he hadn't dared to feel for months, a gentle, budding hope. For the first time, he sensed that maybe, just maybe, happiness could find him again.